I think your application is going to be one that a lot of students are going to be intrigued about for one specific reason. Application Renovation Season 3, Episode 11. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am doing excellent. I'm excited to chat with you about your application. I think your application is going to be one that a lot of students are going to be intrigued about for one specific reason: your stats. You crushed it with your stats, and yet we're still sitting here at the end of an application cycle with a couple wait lists but no acceptances. Talk about why you think potentially you're not having any acceptances as of yet.
One thing that I've thought about is my relative lack of volunteering relative to other things such as research. And then I think a major part of the reason why is because I think that I presented a very formulaic and weaker narrative.
What do you mean by formulaic and weaker narrative?
So when I was crafting my personal statement, I searched for several examples of personal statements and just figured that I would put some examples of clinical volunteering, shadowing, and tie it all together with some core traits of mine, saying this is why I want to become a physician, when I think I could have been more reflective of my true self.
That makes sense, right? You were trying to check off some boxes, fit a mold for a personal statement instead of telling your story. That's a very common mistake that just we see on application renovation episode after episode. Students trying to stand out, trying to be different, and in the end falling flat on their face because they're not being true to who they are. Right? I cannot say it enough. You have to be true to who you are. You have to tell your story, your journey, and not try to stand out to do well in this process. So I'm glad you've gotten to that reflection, and definitely something that we'll see as I take a look at your application here. You ready to dive into that?
Let's go.
All right. So right off the bat, applying super early. Great job. You can see only a 3-week turnaround time there, which is awesome. So I'm interested. You declined to comment about racial identification and ethnic identification. I can assume why you did that, but why did you do that? If you would care to indulge me, because a lot of people do this. And I had one student this past cycle where I think it actually hurt her. And she was like, yeah, I don't know why I did that. Why did you do that?
So I didn't have a strong preference for what I should have done, but I got some input from my parents during the application, and they suggested that I decline to respond. And I believe it was because I am an overrepresented minority in medicine.
Okay.
And so the assumption was that this would work a little better in my favor.
So do you know the term overrepresented in medicine is a fake, made-up thing in the pre-med world?
I did not.
Yeah. So underrepresented in medicine is a true thing that came about from a study. It was like 3,000 and 2,000 or something like that. That was co-sponsored by the AMC back in like 1994 or something. And they developed this term called underrepresented in medicine. It used to have a very specific definition, and now it doesn't. And the pre-med world said, well, if there's underrepresented in medicine, there must be overrepresented in medicine. And it's an excuse to say, I am disproportionately affected, negatively affected, because I'm overrepresented in medicine. Right? And that was my assumption of why you didn't put it in there, because as an Asian applicant, you're technically overrepresented in medicine, and you're trying to hide behind that, right? And it's a game that students like to play, And I don't like the game because, again, overrepresented in medicine is this made up language. It's just they're treating me poorly because there's lots of white people out there applying to medical school, and so I'm not going to get in. They're going to treat me differently, right? You have to be who you are. You are who you are. You can't change that. I was told way back in the day by a pre-med advisor who believed in this whole overrepresented in medicine crap that I was never going to get into medical school because I was a white male. There were too many of us applying to medical school, right? You have to be who you are. You can't change that. Own it. So that was just an interesting thing, and I'm glad you mentioned that, right? Told why you did that, because that's why my assumption was. So just a random thing that's top of mind, because I was actually having this discussion with a person high up in medical school admissions and medical school administration. She was looking at my newest book, and I have that term underrepresented medicine and overrepresented medicine, and we were hashing out how to exactly describe it in the book. So good little talking point there. All right. Continuing on in our journey, we see no major red flags in the demographics. We get to your grades, and we see lots and lots and lots of A's, and it shows up here in your GPA, right? That all other 388, you're slacking there a little bit. So stats, 521 MCAT score, stats are not your issue, right? You can't get any better than that. I mean, you technically can, but you can't. So great job there. Why do you think you were so successful stat-wise?
Well, first of all, thank you. As an undergraduate, I focused a lot on my grades. It's just something that my family and the environment I grew up in really valued. And so when I decided to go all the way out to the other side of the country, I went to college in San Diego, but I grew up on the East Coast. I didn't have any family nearby, and it opened up a lot of opportunities for me, but I felt the need to almost make good on the promise and all the support that my parents gave me. And I think that my vision of that for them was to do well in my classes and all of that. So that was a big part in my focus.
It shows. So good job. All right. So very common thread that we've had a lot the last several episodes of Application Renovation is stats are not the issue. And so continuing that thread here. And we get into your experiences. You are a tutor mentor for this Coach Art. It looks like something you picked up during the pandemic where you could virtually mentor chronically ill children. Looks great. 150 hours going through the kind of the start of medical school next year, which is good. You have this story of befriending Ben, right? You're telling this story, which is great. Computers and chemistry, talked about his mission to build a computer. Smiled from ear to ear when I shared my experience of doing the same. So you have this great story. So good job here. This is about as good of a description as you can get. Okay? And we talk about publications, which is good. Nothing special there. And then we get to your medical and clinical experience here that lasted several months as this intern. Is this something that is ongoing, or did it stop with the pandemic?
It went through the pandemic, and
Okay.
I actually recently completed that and am now focusing on an EMT class.
Okay. What do you mean you completed it? The internship was stopped at a certain point?
So I did volunteer there through the COVID pandemic, and I actually upped my hours to continue supporting the nurses there.
Okay.
But the program, they basically have a graduation requirement for how many hours you have to be there. And so I recently completed that.
Okay. All right. So you did that. So that end date isn't exactly right, which is fine. So things change, life changes. I have lots of red on here, and I wrote list on the side here because your description is basically just a list of everything you did, right?
Mhm.
Following a review of your initial application, of course, people apply to jobs and volunteer positions and stuff. Like, of course, they reviewed it. Well, you don't need to tell me they reviewed it, so it was just a little bit weird. You applied, finally became a hospital volunteer prior to working. You completed BLS, which included like just super basic things here that you don't need to put in your application. You studied in-depth guide of regulations, patient care skills. Like, okay, you read the employee handbook, right? It's like, you don't need to tell me this. You demonstrated these abilities during a day-long practical exam. Again, great, got it. Like, just super, super basic things. And then occasionally I made occupied and unoccupied beds, responded to patient falls, like just very common list of things, like not anything that is impactful at all for you. Okay. And then we get to the most meaningful remarks here, and you dive into a story, which I can tell, right? You've taken something to heart about stories and telling stories, and you have this story of this patient Ed, and you talk about using the bedpan, right? And the way that you told this story just came across very poorly, right? He dejectedly expressed shame and apologized for needing assistance as we began clinical removers. The room lacked ventilation, and I began to notice, right? Do you really need to talk about the smell of somebody's bowel movements in your
Right.
application? So it was just, in my mind, just poor form mentioning that. I don't know if you were trying to go for humor, which I don't recommend because that's typically what happens. It just doesn't come across right. So I wouldn't put that in there. And then you have this comment here, but instead of inapt comments, and I had to Google what inapt meant because the only word that's similar to that I know is inept. And so I asked my wife, who knows a lot about vocabulary. She's like, inapt's not a word. And so I had to Google it. And of course it is a word and it makes sense, but you don't need big words. Don't use big words. Even though that's 5 letters, it's a small word. It's a small, big word. So stay away from fancy words, right? And this sentence was weird to me, right? But instead of inapt comments, I smiled and assured him that it was no trouble at all. What was the goal of that sentence for you in your mind?
I'm really glad that you brought that up. Now that we're going over it, I completely see where you're coming from.
I'm not
And
coming
I
from
think that
anywhere. I'm just asking you what was the
or,
goal of that. I'm not saying anything yet.
well, I think when I initially wrote that, I was probably just typing out everything that went through my mind in that moment. But when you said it was unnecessary, you're absolutely correct. And I also believe it's unnecessary revisiting it.
Okay. So what I read into this, and I've read a lot of these essays and extracurricular descriptions, is when I see a student trying hard to let me know that they are good at communicating, that they don't make inapt comments, that you're not gonna like go off on this wild ride of conversation, which is usually inappropriate conversation. Usually when I see students trying hard to make sure that I know that they wouldn't do that, it's usually because they do that. And so it just comes across as, what are you hiding here, right? Are you an awkward person in conversation and you're trying to hide by saying, look, I'm not awkward. I didn't say anything weird, as he was stinking up the room, right? And so just it comes across as like, what else is going on here? So I'm going to keep reading and we'll see if anything else like that pops up. Okay. We might see a trend. I'm foreshadowing a little bit. Okay. So, you talk about kind of this discussion, talking about baseball, and then you have this weird comment. Although I was tired and hungry, it was gratifying to, like, why would you say that? Of course, like when you're working, sometimes you're tired and sometimes you're hungry. Why does that need to come through on your application? So just another weird kind of comment there. this comment here, right, again, I also use skills that I learned in other experiences on a daily basis. Okay, right, that's what we do day in and day out. We use skills that we learned the day before, and we continue to move forward and build upon those skills and go and go and go. So again, just random words and thoughts here that don't seem to be actually helping you. They're just there. You talked about this demonstration about blood pressure using her bedside water cup with a straw and explained how pressure increased. And so it's kind of interesting. It's kind of enjoyable. Talking about Shark Tank, which is cool. The perspective taking and socialization in the clinic was an interesting kind of takeaway for that. So not horrible, this second part. We get to honors, awards, recognitions. Nothing much to say there. And then we get to physician shadowing. So physician shadowing, you have a good amount of hours. They were from 1 month several years ago. And it was very interesting that you focused on the negative here, right, to begin with. I have never been happier to be wrong. I expected to be passive in a family clinic. Right? Again, why would you mention that in your application?
I think for me, the thought process behind that initially was to show that I love being corrected and learning in that way, and showing how the experience differed from my expectations.
So your expectations were this is going to be super boring, but I want a career in medicine where I can be bored every day.
I see.
Right. So it just comes across wrong. And that's why I tell students, just don't focus on negative things in the application. Period. There's no need to bring that up at all. Talk about the good things that happened when you were shadowing. Right? There's no need, again, for your agenda where you're like, I was trying to show that I can be taught, I can learn new things, that I can be corrected. Right? There's no need to do that. You're watering down your story by trying to force this thing, and that just comes out wrong. We continue on with talking about the diagnosis, invited me on my thoughts and diagnosis, right? You're kind of showing off here. I could deduce COPD. I got COVID on the brain. COPD and suggested steroids, right? I found my passion for medical puzzles and learned how to treat people, not just ailments. Right, so it's kind of generic cliche. I love puzzles. I like the thought process behind things. Look how smart I am already. I know how to diagnose COPD, etc. All right, so just not needed, and it's just more of a distraction. We have so shadowing from a couple years ago. Do you have any other shadowing, or is that the only shadowing that you have?
That's my only shadowing experience.
Okay. So publications, great, nothing special there. You kind of focus on a little bit of the sales pitch, communication, collaboration, unlock our collective potential, right? Showing like I can communicate, I can collaborate, right? This kind of going back to I don't have awkward conversations, I'm a good communicator. So again, maybe a little bit more foreshadowing there. Research lab, good amount of hours going on, so good job with that. And then we have your RA job here. So a resident assistant in college, which again is a very common kind of job that students have. The thing that I highlighted here, right, just very similar to how you talked about basically reading the employee handbook and the clinical experience you had, very similar here. We discussed responsibilities, partnerships, house themes. I learned school policies, studied equity, diversity, inclusion, right? Just basic things that don't need to be here. Just more of just wasted characters. I like what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to tell stories. You're trying to get into where you want to be. You're talking about playing dodgeball games, then playing some pickup basketball, which is good. You're trying the right thing. The things that I highlighted here at the bottom was this kind of story of Shay that was very interesting, right? You said, I withheld my presuppositions. Like, I don't even know what that word is. Like, I don't even know. Presuppositions. Like, that's just too big of a word for me. I ain't that smart. Right? Judgments, biases, whatever you want to call it, are easier words for that. She was falling behind in chemistry, consuming her time. In a group of 3 of us, I reviewed their fair concerns, outlined a cleaning plan, and introduced the campus's tutoring services. I learned to avoid my personal biases, and in all, being an HA developed my passion for guiding others. Okay, so just like the sales pitch side of it, to me, having read a bunch of these, is you are trying to show me, look at me, I know how not to judge people. And I, as a physician, will be put in a position where I will have to not judge people and just treat them as they are, right? And so it's just, you're trying too hard to focus on what you think I want you to be versus just who you are and the experiences that you had. The Sabre West journey, Sabre I think comes up later on as well with your research. Nothing special there. Some student health and well-being advocate. Nothing too bad there. And then student dining hall was good. I thought this was cute. The one tater tot at a time. Like, there's a little bit of humor, but that was mild and that was cute. Maybe because I love tater tots. I don't know. And then we have this research assistant project manager, again, kind of going into you talking about the Sabre thing. Nothing big here. Obviously, a good amount of hours, a good amount of your time that you devoted to this. So just shows what you've been doing. Again, good story here using latex, the word processor, what to do, and guiding you through this, blah, blah, blah. So nothing that stands out as amazing or bad or anything. It's just a decent experience there. I love Hobbies on an application, which is great. I would try to estimate hours for things. A lot of students will just put 0 for Hobbies, but is it truly 0? Like, you don't do them, but you wish you could do them? Or are you just putting 0 because it's just too hard to estimate? So I would always try to estimate. And then we have this sales associate job that you did for a while. And you tell this story that really had nothing to do with being a sales associate, but it was this medical experience, this heightened kind of emotional experience where, again, you're focused on, I'm ready to handle the situation, so I'm good to go, right? So you talked about the popcorn shop across the street was in flames, calling 911, began gathering in the square, and you feared an explosion. I ran into the square, right? You're highlighting this. Look at me. Look at how I react in a stressful situation. Again, it really has nothing to do with being a sales associate, the story that you told here. You were focused on, let me show them a time where I handled myself in a stressful, somewhat medically related situation, and they're going to be able to see that I'm ready to be a doctor, right? Don't do that. For all of you watching later on, and for you in the future, don't do that. It's not the point of this application process. I want to know who you were. You were a sales associate. Tell me about your favorite customer or something that happened on the job where you were challenged. Not like, I'm going to show you this medical thing that just happened to happen as well. So then we get to your personal statement. And I think up until this point, I'm excited to keep reading. You have great stats. You have good experiences. The shadowing was a while ago, which is a bummer. I would like to see more recent shadowing. Obviously, COVID kind of threw all of that off. So I'll give you the benefit of the doubt and say, oh, maybe you were planning on shadowing, but COVID stopped you. Right. So I'll keep reading and go, okay, please be a good personal statement so I can invite you for an interview and understand who you are and why you want to be a doctor. And I think this is the biggest fault that you have in your application is your personal statement. And I want to challenge you. You mentioned in the application for application renovation, that you felt your personal statement was a little weak because it didn't really have your whole application didn't have this kind of cohesive theme and idea. And you wanted my kind of advice on how to do that. And my advice is don't do that. When students try to have a cohesive theme across their application, you're forcing a narrative that may not be true to who you are, but you think you have to have this cohesive theme, right? But if you are someone who loves public health and 3 of your experiences are about public health and your personal statement has some information about public health because that's who you are, then yes, it looks like there's a theme across your application because all you're doing is talking about who you are, right? It's not a forced theme. It's just your story, okay? So I don't think you need to force any parts of your application to fit with other parts because that's not the way the application is. Your experiences are your experiences. Your personal statement's your personal statement. Your secondaries are your secondaries. You don't need to go, okay, well, I mentioned in my personal statement this, and I carried that across 4 different experiences, and I need to continue to carry it across in my secondaries, and I better make sure I continue it in my interviews, right? Because then you're forcing a narrative that isn't necessarily who you are, okay? I think students try to make this process much harder than it really is. It really is easy. Just tell your story, right? Write about who you are, why you want to be a doctor. In your experiences, write about what you did and the impact that you had or the impact that it had on you. Your interviews, go have a conversation, right? It's really that easy. But students like to make it harder. All right, getting back to the personal statement. You talked about what I'm assuming is mowing a lawn here, right? Yanking the starter, engine sputtered to life, scent of grass danced around me as I pushed forward. I mowed each lane. Now, I take this as a typo. I'm guessing you meant like each street. But I think you meant to say lawn, but it came out as lane. And so right off the bat, I'm like, oh, I'm scratching my head going, what did he mean? Anyway, that's a small thing. All right. You smiled at your masterpiece, collected $20 from my neighbor. Nice doing business with you, I exclaimed. I don't like dialogue in personal statements. It's confusing. I don't think it belongs. You just have that one line there, so it's not bad. Racing back home to make the first deposit of my summertime journey to earn $1,200. I wanted to build a computer from scratch before 8th grade. Great. Why the heck did I just read that? This is your essay to talk about why you want to be a doctor, and you just wasted 4 lines here, probably 200 characters. If I were to estimate 200 characters, telling me about mowing grass and earning money to build a computer. Okay. So again, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt because me, as a selfish admissions committee member, I want a student who has a 3.99 science GPA and a 5.21 MCAT to make my stats look good. So I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt, right? So we're going to continue. Like, please, let's get better. All right. Unexpectedly, my passion for building computers taught me the value of diligent work. So right off the bat, sales pitch, right? I can work hard. When students focus on sales pitches, you're watering down who you are. I want to know who you are and why you want to be a physician, not that you're able to work diligently. Got it?
Got it.
I was finally able to fulfill my hobby for taxing flight simulators. I don't know what taxing flight simulators means, but okay. Since finishing my machine, I have exacted this work ethic towards leadership, research, and patient care. I am super confused now. Are you telling me that you building a computer for flight simulators made you want to be a doctor? Or are you telling me that your work ethic, you're just focused on patient care with your work ethic now? So again, you're watering down and confusing your message now because you're so focused on selling the reader, look at me, look how I have leadership, I have research and patient care, all because of my work ethic. Why do you want to be a doctor? That's all I want to know. Okay? So, through these experiences, I have unearthed, which is your favorite word. You use it several times. So, start to find other words. Thesaurus does you well. Unearthed compassion, commitment, communication, and respect for my 4 central codes and clarified my fit within medicine, the humanistic practice of science. I have no idea what that sentence means. Right, again, unearthed compassion, commitment, communication, going back to that theme I mentioned earlier about people who typically aren't good at communicating, trying to forcefully tell people that they are good at communicating. Right? And I don't know you, so I'm not telling you that you're bad at communicating, but that's always a concern of mine, right? I have compassion. I'm good at communicating. Trust me, I'm good at communicating. I'm writing it down in this essay that I crafted over the course of 2 months to tell you that I'm good at communicating. You have to be careful with that. The goal of this essay is not to sell yourself. You have, up until this point, 2 paragraphs in, have told me that you are a diligent worker, that you have strong work ethic, that you are good at leadership, that you've done research, that you have patient care, that you have compassion, that you are committed, that you are a good communicator, and that you respect your 4 central codes, which I have no idea what they are. Unless compassion, commitment, communication, and respect are your 4 central codes, which I'm guessing that's what you meant to say.
That is, yes.
Okay. So you took this opportunity to tell me why you want to be a physician. You're 5,300 characters. And you said, I'm going to bet everything on compassion, commitment, communication, and respect. I'm going to call those my 4 central codes. I'm going to mention my codes throughout my whole essay. These things, these 4 things are what I think a good physician needs to have. And that the admissions committee is going to see that I have those things, and they're going to want to invite me for an interview and accept me because I have these things. These are my codes, right? Do you think you're the only one that cares about compassion, commitment, communication, and respect?
Not at all.
No, not at all. Do you think you're the best at compassion, communication, commitment, and respect?
Definitely not.
Okay. So when I bring this up, and I hammer this home as much as I can, focusing on these things does nothing to help you stand out. Because you saying that you have these things means absolutely nothing. I can't quantify it. I can't qualify it, right? I don't know your compassion versus the other 10,000 applicants. And nor do I care, because it's not until I meet you and I see you working with patients and working with your classmates where I will see your compassion come through. You telling me that you're compassionate means nothing. Okay? So it's a waste of time, it's a waste of space, and it's a distraction from the ultimate goal of telling me why you want to be a physician. Got it? And I will tell you, right, I think someone who has close to a 4.0 GPA, an outstanding MCAT score, is going to have to overcome this potential stigma of like, are you just book smart, but not a people person, right? There's this stigma out there that if you're that smart stat-wise, that you're not going to be good at communicating, which is why I was picking apart the different parts where you were like, I'm good at communicating. I'm like, are you though? Because your stats are really good, and we know lots of really smart people who aren't very good at communicating. And I know I'm stereotyping, and again, I don't know you, so I don't know if that's who you are. But just you have to remember that the people reading your application don't know who you are either, right? They're reading it just as blindly as I was reading it, making a lot of broad assumptions and stereotypes looking at different parts of your application. Okay. And so these things stand out. If you're sitting here telling me I can communicate, I'm empathetic, then I have to ask, why are you so focused on these things? Right? Are you concerned about those things for you? Or, like most students, are you just trying to sell me because you think that's what makes a good physician? Right? All right. I think I've beat that one enough. Okay. So we're not off to a good start, but let's keep reading. You have great stats. I want to keep reading. I want to invite you for an interview. So we get into this story of being an RA, right? And you getting this call in the middle of the night, RA training, your third year of college taught me how to manage a body of 100 first-year students. But this, right, a little bit too creative writing-y, a little bit too like talking to the reader. I just don't like this style for a personal statement. That's more of a personal preference for me. The story here, right? You decided to focus on the story. I have no idea what eclipsed her fingertip meant. What does that mean?
She cut off the tip of her finger.
What? I've never heard that term, eclipsed her fingertip.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. It made sense in my head when I wrote it, but clearly it wasn't a good choice.
Yeah. I'm a doctor. I've never heard that term before. That's not to say that it's not a real thing, and I just have never heard it. I asked my wife about it. She's like, I don't know what that means. So just, again, trying to be a little bit too fancy with your inapt word earlier, eclipsed here. So just, you went a little bit too wordy. You talk about here assessing her insurance. I call it an Uber. Like, it's just super weird. Like, oh, I'm gonna check your insurance. Nobody does that. Like, who? Like, you cut your finger off. Let me see your insurance card, ma'am. Like, just get her to the hospital, right? That's all that matters. So it's just weird, right? You dressed her wound to little avail. Her pain was quite evident. Got it. In an attempt to diffuse the ensuing tension with small talk and check-ins, right? So again, like this weird, you mentioned it earlier with the guy whose bowel movement you smelled, talking about this, like, I'm going to avoid weird conversation. And here again, you're talking about avoiding weird conversation. So it's like, are you scared of weird conversation? I don't know what there's this trend that I've seen throughout your application that concerns me as someone who's never met you. I have a feeling that you're probably not somebody who's really good at small talk. Would you say you're good at small talk?
Honestly, I'd say I'm pretty good with small talk, okay. But I completely see where you're coming from.
Good. All right. That's
my writing.
That's all I care, right? I don't care that I'm right. I just want to see I want you to see what I see when I'm reading this. Okay. So you, again, right, this wrapped in a warm and calm demeanor. Like, I'm empathetic. I can wrap small talk in this warm and calm demeanor. It's just weird. Like, you don't need to say that. You don't need to talk like that. Her affect quickly changed. It dawned on me that my demeanor succeeded, right? Like, oh, look at me. Like, I can help people just by talking to them with my demeanor. Right? Again, it comes off as just really strange to focus on that. And then what you learned, right? Treatment extends far beyond the wound, and compassion is just as, if not more, necessary. Students like to focus on I know that to be a good doctor, it's not just knowing everything. It's also being empathetic and compassionate. Got it. Like, good for you. But do you know who else knows that? Everyone else who has a heart, who is a good human being, who doesn't want to be a doctor too. Right? We all know that compassion is the start of everything. Right? And so for you to say, oh, I've learned this thing, right? It doesn't help me understand who you are and why you want to be a doctor. Right?
It's not my story.
Which is not your story. That is the perfect response to that comment. It's not your story. Nowhere yet have I seen who you are and what your story is. I have seen what you think I want to see. Right? You think I want to see someone who is compassionate, committed, right? Communicates, respectful, who has a strong demeanor, more compassion. But I don't know who you are, and I don't know why you want to be a doctor. I know that you're really smart, but I know lots of people who are really, really smart who turn out to be horrible doctors because they don't know why they want to be a doctor other than it was just what they should do. Right? So we get to the end of this, and we get to, as a physician, my patients can expect at least this level of compassion. It's just a completely strange comment. At least this level of compassion. Like, I hope there's more compassion. Like, you rode in the Uber with her, and oh boy, you stayed until 4:30 in the morning. That's amazing how compassionate of you. Right? Well, guess what you're going to do as a physician? You're going to be staying a lot longer. Right? So it's just a very weird comment. The continuing on here with your essay. Early on at UCSD, I struggled to root interest in our development of a new way to analyze group dynamics. I was jealous of my peers who worked in cancer-related labs, right? That negativity. There's no need to talk about jealousy of other people in your personal statement. You get your first poster presentation, poster talk. Okay? 4 years later, project impacts, develop an R interface. I really need to look into R. Everyone talks about this R programming language. New students to continue our work upon my finale, right? So talking about research has nothing to do with why you want to be a doctor. I don't like it in personal statements. I want to know why you want to be a physician. If the research happens to be a part of your story on why you want to be a doctor, great, make it work. But this has nothing to do with why you want to be a doctor. Okay? And then your takeaway here. Here's this unearthed again as your word of the day. I unearthed the values of, oh, look what we've got here again. Communication. I promise. Right. I'm a good communicator. Respect for other people's opinions. Got it. Okay. I will use feedback from my patients and team to enhance my practice and find drive when I may need it. It's all focused on the skills that you think you have that are necessary to be a good physician. I still have zero idea about why you want to be a doctor. Zero. Other than somehow building a computer led to potentially being a doctor. Zero idea why you want to be a doctor. My codes were indeed reflected in the clinic I shadowed. What codes? Oh, right. This is what I had to do. I read this the first time. I'm like, what codes are you talking about? And I'm like, oh, these codes. Mm-hmm. Okay. I would actually say that's one code. The code has 4 things, but it's actually one code. But maybe that's my comic book nerd in me. So the codes, right? You're bringing up this code again. Indeed reflected in the clinic I shadowed. I embodied these across 328 unique patients. Again, I don't know why you're like, did you really keep track of every single patient that you came across? It's a little strange, but okay. So, brief these quizzes revealed my zeal for solving medical puzzles. I had an episode of Application Renovation an episode or two ago, I think. It was episode 9. It was an engineer applying to medical school where his whole application was patients are puzzles. Patients don't want to be puzzles. Patients want to be people that you take care of. Admissions committees don't want you to see patients as puzzles. They don't care that you like puzzles. Okay? They want you to see that you are a human being who has had experiences and knows why you want to be a doctor. And through those stories, I can see that you're a compassionate, empathetic person. I don't care that you like puzzles. Became clear that medicine continued after the patient left. Of course it does. Right? What do you think happens? Like, everyone is cured until the appointments start the next day? It's just a very strange comment again. It is perpetually humanistic application towards people, not just an application of science against a malady. Students love defining what they think medicine is. It doesn't help me understand who you are. It's just you trying to show, look, I know what medicine is. You talk about this internship and getting this new patient who is transferred in. I kind of chuckled at this, right? Patients aren't transferred for a change in scenery. Patients are transferred for a change in care because wherever they were at before didn't have the resources for them or whatever it may be. The patient's like, I'm bored of this hospital. Transfer me to a new one. So just I chuckled at that. I'm not sure what you meant there, but anyway, just some weird stuff here, right? She expressed her wish to go for a walk, and I respected this as we prepared for ambulation, right? It's just nobody talks like that. Like, hey guys, I'm going to prepare for ambulation. Like, no, I'm gonna go walk with my patient. So
absolutely,
like, right? Again, you're trying to force this narrative of, look, I care, I'm compassionate. The patient wanted to walk, and I was right there with her, ambulating with her. Right? It's just it doesn't work. It doesn't work well. Again, codes. Just that theme of codes just didn't work well. Right? Strong work ethic again. Love of computers has unexpectedly built my love of medicine. Okay. So here we are. I have this student who has amazing stats, who I would love to have in my class, who has some clinical experience, who has some shadowing experience. So it looks like he's doing the things to prove to himself that he wants to be a physician. Now I just want to know why he wants to be a physician. This is my thought process as I'm looking at your application. And I get to the end. I have no idea why you started exploring medicine. I can see that you're telling some stories of patients that come across a little bit weird because most of it is just trying to sell skills. Mm-hmm. And then I see this statement that strong work ethic and love of building computers is why you want to be a doctor. That's what this statement says right here.
And that makes no sense.
I want to be a doctor because I love computers and I have strong work ethic. And at that point, I would put your application to the side and say to the gods for you to hear, get some more experience, learn how to tell your story better. Because I want to accept students in my class who know why they want to be physicians. I've seen it time and time again from students like yourself, and I'm not saying this is your specific story, but I've seen it over and over again that students are forced down this path because of overbearing parents, right? And we can stereotype Asian parents all day long, but it's the same with my Jewish parents too, and South Asian parents is you're going to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, right? And we see lots of applications coming through from students who don't want to be in healthcare, but their parents want them to be. And this is the kind of application that we see. just kind of a mess of, I can't really tell you why I want to be a doctor because I don't really know. But I know that I have strong work ethic, right? And oh, by the way, I like to build computers, right? So it's just very, very strange. Now, let's assume you want to be a doctor, right? That's the assumption we're going with. I want you to be a doctor. You need to tell your story about why did you start to explore healthcare? And from your experiences, why did they continue to motivate you to be a physician? Get rid of all of the sales pitch. You don't need it. It doesn't work. It doesn't help. It doesn't help me understand who you are. Tell your story about why you want to be a doctor. Do that in any way that's any better than this. And you'll have interviews at almost every school that you apply to because of your stats and the experiences that you've had. You've had enough of the experiences, but you haven't reflected and thought through them, at least in the proper way, to tell the story about why you want to be a doctor.
Absolutely.
So we get to your school list. Nothing real big here. You're a Pennsylvania resident or California resident at this point?
I am a resident of Pennsylvania, but I think I also have residency in Ohio.
You can only have residency in one state.
I see.
Technically. Now, that doesn't mean, and I'll put a caveat on that, right? Technically, you only have residency in one state. That's just how it works. Every state has their own laws. Usually when you take residency in one state, you give up residency in another state. That's how it works. That's not to say that there are medical schools out there and the state that the medical school operates in has kind of different rules for classifying you as an in-state resident. For example, Kentucky, last I checked, I had a student who lived in Kentucky, moved to Texas in the middle of the application cycle. I told her, don't move in the middle of an application cycle. Then you're like homeless. You're residentless. I told her, talk to the schools in Kentucky and see what they think. And they told her, because you went to high school here and because your parents live here, we still consider you in-state. She technically wasn't a resident of Kentucky anymore once she moved out and established a residency in Texas where she was moving to. But for residency status purposes, for the school, they still considered her in-state. And so that's where I always talk about, right, for AMCAS, she would be considered a Texas resident, assuming she got her residency there. But she would be considered out of state when it comes to stats looking at University of Kentucky. Right? And so I always talk about the students who are accepted as out-of-state students for a public school, you don't know what their stories are. Their stories may be very similar to this girl who grew up in Kentucky, went to high school in Kentucky, her parents live in Kentucky. She's technically out of state, but they still treat her as in-state, right? She has strong ties to Kentucky. So, random kind of thought process about public in-state versus out-of-state to look at your school list. So we look at your school list. We have Einstein, Case, Drexel, Geisel, Georgetown, Keck, Temple, Loma Linda are all private schools, as far as I know. Ohio State is public, and so you were like, oh, maybe I'm an Ohio resident, right? You either are or you aren't, depending on what you put on your application. And Ohio State may have some of those technicalities where they would consider you in-state. Penn State is private. University of Penn is private. Thomas Jefferson private. Stanford private. Brown private, right? So lots of private schools, which are great. All the California schools, or most of the California schools. Cincinnati, again, this Ohio potential question mark that you had as a public school. Michigan is public, but is very out-of-state friendly. And Virginia. Why did you add Virginia on there as a public school?
I added it. I think I was looking for each school just to make sure if I was out of state that they did accept out of state students.
Okay.
And I also made the decision based off of stat ranges.
Okay. So I highly, highly, highly discourage stat range picking. But as long as you know that they accept out-of-state students at a range that is acceptable to you, that's great. Vandy's private, Wake is private. So decent job with school lists in terms of private public. That's all I got. I think your personal statement is what hurt you in your application. 1,000%.
I absolutely agree.
Thoughts?
I mean, first thought that comes to mind, thank you so much for taking the time today and going through everything.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And honestly,
thank you for allowing me to criticize in public. And again, I'm doing it for your best interest. So I hope you took it that way.
Absolutely. And I'm so grateful that you did.
Yeah.
After like reflecting a lot, I feel validated that my writing is what brought me down. And honestly, I feel like I wrote myself out of the process.
I would change that language a little bit because students, I think people in general have this imposter syndrome about being a bad writer. You don't need to be a good writer to write a great personal statement. You need to tell your story.
Mm-hmm.
And you were just so far disconnected from the right focus. It doesn't matter. Like you could be, what's his name? Stephen, what's his name?
Stephen King?
Yeah, you could be Stephen King and be an amazing writer with a completely wrong focus and have a dud on your hands.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You have to be focused on the right thing. And even as a mediocre writer, still have an amazing personal statement.
Understood. So that actually brings me to my next point in that my personal statement, I think that my actual story, I was scared to write about that at first because I felt that it was too. What happened was I have a very computer heavy background, right? And so I, was pursuing that all the way through high school. And then I attended a research camp where I was led to do dry lab research at the University of Pittsburgh. But as a part of the camp, it was very unexpected. I was able to witness the surgery because they just had the medical center right there, and they just let all of us high school researchers go in one at a time and observe. And it was just in that moment, I felt this very strong draw to want to pursue medicine suddenly. And I feel that.
And that's your story, and that would have been so much better to focus on. Of like being at this camp and this fortuitous experience of being able to go into an operating room and how that lit you up inside to want to explore it further, right? That is your story. You can't hide from that.
Right.
Why are you scared to tell that story?
I was scared at the time because I felt that it would have painted me as too wishy-washy, as like, I dedicate all my life leading up to, one point with computers. And then in like a split second, I'm like, oh, wait, I really like medicine.
But it's not a split second. It's a split second for this seed to be planted, as I talk about in my personal statement book, right? This seed is planted of like, oh, that's kind of cool. Let me go explore that some more and see if maybe I am interested in that, right? This is how humans learn and explore and find out what we're passionate about, is we dip our toes in lots of things. And for you were only exposed to computers for a long time, and so that's what you thought you loved. And then this other thing opened your eyes, and you're like, oh my gosh, there's this other thing out there that I may love too. And who's to say you can't love computers and medicine? We have a lot of that going on these days, in case you haven't noticed. So, again, you strayed away from your story because you were concerned about what someone would think when they read it. Mm-hmm. But you weren't concerned about what they would read, when you were forcing this false narrative of like, oh, look how compassionate, and I'm not saying you're not compassionate, but this narrative of I'm compassionate and respectful and dedicated and motivated and hardworking, and like,
I I actually was in the process late last week drafting a new personal statement just because, in my mind, I read through everything again, and this was, well before today where we're recording this, and I was like, wow, this is horrible. Like I came up with some traits and, basically just said why medicine. Well, because like it shares those traits, but
that
it's
is what 50% of students applying to medical school do, right? I'm making that number
mhm,
off the top of my head. But that is what so many students do. They
mhm.
list all the traits that they think physicians have. They list all those traits in their personal statement and go, look, they match. You should accept me.
Mhm.
It's not how this works.
I see. Yes, I see that now.
Good.
Um, is it possible for me to write out like basically just a brand new personal statement? And I am on some wait list. I still haven't heard back. Would it be out of the question to send those schools a new copy of that?
I wouldn't. It's an interesting thought. And at the end of the day, would it hurt you? No, because they've already told you no up until this point, right? You're on a wait list.
Mhm.
I think I typically when kind of responding with letters of intent and updates, especially when you're on a wait list, which means you've interviewed, and kind of just a random aside talking about interviews, is typically when I see a personal statement like this, my assumption is that the interview did both of your interviews ask why you want to be a doctor?
They didn't explicitly, but did ask me to tell them about myself.
Okay. And you worked it in
And
there.
I feel like I went on a rant about how I grew up with computers, how I love to see how things work, and then yeah.
Okay. So that was my comment was typically when the personal statement is a little bit of a jumbled mess, the why I want to be a doctor in an interview is still a jumbled mess because usually you haven't come to that conclusion of like, oh crap, my personal statement's bad. I need to change that for my interviews. Um,
Hmm.
but at the end of the day, I like to focus on weaknesses with updates and letters of intent and stuff to say, I know I'm a little bit weak in this area. Here's what I've been doing to work on it. It's hard to say, I know I was a little bit weak with my personal statement. Here's a new one just in case you want to read it. That's probably a stretch. I probably wouldn't go there. Um, although if one of those schools is your dream school, shoot your shot.
Okay.
Maybe
Yeah.
maybe I wouldn't do a whole personal statement, but
Hmm.
I would write a short statement to reflect on your journey a little bit better and a little bit more concisely to see if that
Hmm.
potentially helps.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Yep.
And just a couple more questions.
Yep.
Um, about the experience for marks. So I know that for the most meaningful, I have, some characters and then I have some additional characters. I was listing all my duties in that one portion for just the first part, the shorter part.
Yep.
What do you recommend I do instead?
Tell a story. Yeah. Have two stories. 700 character story and a 1325 character story.
Okay.
Listing of job duties is just a waste of space, period. Anything is better
Okay.
than that.
Okay. Great. And I can't remember my last question,
All right.
but thank you so much for having me here.
You are welcome. Thank you for applying and allowing me to pick apart your application, specifically your personal statement, in a public way, so that lots of other people can learn from this. I think you've set yourself up for success. You just need to focus on that story in a better way, and you'll be in medical school in no time.
Can't wait. Thank you so much.